Hey everyone, welcome back to Kayan Al-Bashar, where today we're going to start building on the mining complex that I have named Zerana Kerivan, which is basically a mashup of the Kurdish words for gold and quarry. And today we will build the quarry section, which is also going to house the Japanese macaques, because monkeys and scaffolding seems like a great deal. However, it ends up being a huge headache for me. But before we get into the habitat and the quarry, I first needed to retune my brain back into building in Plan Zoo, because I was gone for 5 days, and that, well, led my brain to think the best way to retune yourself to Plan Zoo is by building a waterfall. So that's what we're going to do for the first 7 minutes of today's video. But I probably need to clarify why I was gone for 5 days, and it basically comes down to me procrastinating a little bit too much, because I had a project due for college, and you originally have 3 months to make that project. However, I either repressed it or forgot about it, and then I saw, oh, the deadline is coming closer, and that basically meant that I had to make the entire project in 5 days, which you originally have 3 months for. So yeah, don't procrastinate as much as I do. But it is now finished. It was finished right on the day of the deadline, so that's good. However, it does mean that there's some things that will change with the schedule, because I originally planned to have those 5 days set aside to build on the side project that I wanted to have up this Sunday. So yes, this just showed how much I forgot about that project for college. But because the original 5 days I now had to set aside for the college project, I couldn't work on the side project in Planet Zoo, which means that I have to push back that project to next week, which means that this Sunday we will still have Kayan Al-Bashar. However, the next Sunday we will go into the side project. However, Kayan Al-Bashar will, even if the side project goes live and, goes on, we will still have 2 days of Kayan Al-Bashar. So don't worry, Kayan Al-Bashar is not going to die, even though I have a horrible track record by, or at least with, keeping 2 projects afloat. So it's going to be a fun thing. But anyway, back to the waterfall that we're building, because this does give way that we are now at the elevation where water is not constantly frozen. Also, a waterfall is a little bit less likely to freeze because the water is constantly in motion. And the 2 reasons I just gave are just excuses, because I wanted to build a waterfall. So you will now also see a little bit of the foliage from the valley of Kayan Al-Bashar, so the more tropical / deserty plants, such as the Sudanese incense tree, which is remarkably the only tree that I know the name from exactly without even looking at the footage. So yeah, I think the other trees, the ones that I place around now, are the white birch, but I don't know for certain. However, the Sudanese incense trees I somehow remember constantly. Probably because those are like the icon of foliage in Kayan Al-Bashar. But yeah, because we are not really out of the Mirage Mountains yet, you still have those white birch trees. However, not those giant pine trees, which honestly I don't know where to use elsewhere but the Mirage Mountains, and even there I use them very sparingly. Or just to hide things, because whenever you're in doubt about some building, just hide it with foliage. It always works out if you do it correctly. And now back to the waterfall, because yeah, I don't know why my brain told me, let's have a quarry. Let's have a waterfall run right through it, or at least have a river run right through it. This also does mean that this quarry is one of the few habitats, or at least this mining section is one of the few habitats that actually is connected to the just base floor of Kayan Al-Bashar, so it's not floating, because I just thought, like, if you have a mountain or at least a mining complex, you would, try to get deep into the rock, and then with floating islands, if you get too deep or you dig too deep into the rocks, I just imagine the floating rocks or floating islands to just split apart, and that's not pretty, because then, let's just say, I think the Mirage Mountains are, well, in-game they're at least, let's say, 100 meters above ground. I wouldn't say above sea level, because I don't know where the sea level is, but they are at least 100 meters above ground. So most of the floating islands of Kayan Al-Bashar will be at least 25 to 50 meters above ground. So if the island underneath you splits apart, you probably will be dead. But anyway, so back to the waterfall, because I got a little bit off track there. But yeah, it's a rough waterfall. Even though a small section to the right of the waterfall, or at least the right of the upper section of the waterfall, I made a little pond area. And then I threw some trees in it to make it somewhat realistic that there's not like a heavy current. So the trees just got stuck there, and because of that there's a lot of, well, blockage in the water. So the, well, suction of the waterfall isn't as strong there, but it's basically just an excuse because I wanted a slow moving area to the waterfall. And now we actually also get into the quarry section, or the mining section, because the waterfall is all nice and such, but there needs to be a way, or at least a place where the source of the water comes from. It's not just magically appearing here. So I just thought, with gold mining, I, at least myself, always have the connection with water. So I just wanted to have like huge water wheels that drain water out of the mountain. Or yeah, actually that drain water out of the mountain and out of the mines. So it could also be worked as like, if you put some kind of, what's the name for it? Let's just say one way to get the gold away from the rock, you could just place it underneath this water wheel and then just drop the rocks into the stream of the water wheel, and then it would sort itself out for you. But yeah, it was basically just to have more waterfalls, because waterfalls are always pretty. And somehow they, like, even I can't mess them up. Well, that would mean that they are, well, they're not the simplest thing to make, because you just need, well, you really just need to know how waterfalls in real life work to make them look realistic or somewhat real in Planet Zoo. But yeah, these water wheels are just there to create more of them, because I really like just having them. And in the Mirage Mountains I couldn't, because all of the water was frozen. So now we are finally getting off the Mirage Mountains. I finally can build waterfalls again. So yeah, this quarry is just going to be a whole lot of water, which is kind of strange because it's a quarry. So it should probably be drained of water instead of have water go right through it. But you will see me build a lot of scaffolding in the quarry, which, I mean, is understandable. However, most of these, well, beams and planks and such were secretly added, I would say, to the game around the Arctic DLC. So they are not part of the Arctic DLC, but most of them were added around there, but without like any like official word from Frontier. And they are all like based on beams that we already had. So most of these beams already had variants of them, but just in, let's say, they only had like a 4 to 6 meter variant, and now they also have 2 meter variants. However, the new ones, I don't know if it's mislabeled or it really doesn't work, but the original ones, which were like the 4 to 8 meters or 6 meter ones, those are climbable, or at least are labeled as climbable. The new ones aren't, and for, I think it might be, well, I have the slight suspicion that they just aren't labeled as climbable, so the animals can't use them to climb. So most of the scaffolding that you see me build now isn't usable by the animals. So I have no idea if there was any kind of like mistake, or if it's just mislabeled and I am just a giant noob when it comes to actually building climbable things. But yeah, the Japanese macaques can't climb any of this. So I had to actually use the original ones, which is sometimes a little bit annoying because sometimes you want a 2-meter plank and not a 4-meter or 8-meter plank. But yeah, so don't know if it was a mistake or if I'm just completely an idiot when it comes to building climbable stuff. Yeah, I later needed to go back in and build a lot of new stuff, or not a lot, a lot of smaller scaffolding just so that the Japanese macaques had at least one way to get on top, because their habitat does have like, I would say 4 to 3 sections. So you have the sort of middle island, which the, well, waterfall and the river that goes into the giant waterfall connects into, which, well, just that section, so the ground section. Then you have sort of the middle section, which is the section where the water wheels come in. And then you have the upper section, which later is going to house their shelter. So this also means that I actually thought about making the animals climb, so that they don't just stay on the ground, because the red pandas, for some odd reason, just don't climb at all. They just stay on the ground, and they have their climbing needs completely fulfilled, but they don't climb. But for the Japanese macaques, I actually made them climb, because there's like, their food is of course on the ground, their toys are in the middle section, and their shelter is at the top, so they are constantly climbing. This might be cruel, but this is really the only way I got them to climb. Again, don't know if that's a bug or if there's some mistake or I'm just a complete idiot again with building climbing things. But unless I provide them a real way to climb or a real reason to climb, they don't do it. They just stay on the ground, even though they're monkeys. So yeah, this is why the scaffolding was just a complete pain in the ass to build, because they just wouldn't climb it. Or at least they couldn't. It was not even seen as traversable, so yeah, the new pillars that we got with the Arctic DLC, or at least the secretly new pillars, because they weren't announced, and I don't think you have to have the Arctic DLC to get all these pillars or beams. But yeah, the new ones, the Japanese macaques, don't see them as climbable. However, they are based on climbable beams that we originally had, so I don't know what happened there. But I eventually went back into everything and just not redid everything, but just added more climbing sections. Also, yeah, I added a few dams because I just think that the quarry probably wouldn't want to have just a wild river right next to it. However, the second part of the sort of river, it's not really a river, but well, it's a tiny one. But in the end, like, I'm building some kind of thing to regulate the water. In the end, I just let it go right on over top the dam and then go into the, well, rapids. Because, yeah, that's something I sometimes tend to forget, that where you have a waterfall, you also have a very strong current going into that waterfall. So the section to the right of the big waterfall doesn't make the most of sense, because the current, even though there's a little bit of blockage, would still be quite strong there. However, I did make a way that the waterfall or the water wheel that leads into the sort of calmer dammed section is not as strong of a current, by just adding a lot of blockage in there. Or at least one wall of like blockage to make sure that the water hits that wall with a great current and then goes through it with a slightly lower current. But now into the shelter of the Japanese macaques, because I wanted to originally build like a smithy, but then I also thought like, alright, so I want the Japanese macaques in a smithy. How long will it take until one of their tails catch fire? And I'm not that evil to set animals on fire, as I remember what I did to the Siberian tigers, who basically have all open flames in their indoor section of their habitat. Yeah, sometimes things change, but mostly I just didn't want a smithy in there anymore. I want it in another section. Yeah, in the next section of the mining complex, which is going to house the animal that probably wants the Japanese macaques as dinner, so probably best to keep those two separate. But anyway, so what originally was intended to be the smithy is now going to be the mess hall, or the canteen for the miners. So yes, the mine is not completely overrun by the Japanese macaques, they're just probably a nuisance because monkeys tend to do that. They tend to be annoying when they get into a place that isn't meant for them. But yeah, so it's kind of fun that the Japanese macaques basically made their home in the canteen or the mess hall for the miners, because this is probably the least, well, the place that you don't want them the most. But they've just completely taken over this place. So yeah, the quarry is still really for the miners. The mess hall is kind of taken over by the monkeys, because they actually live there. And originally I wanted to have like the miners be able to sit on the basically wooden logs. But then I thought like, alright, let's not be that mean, let's give them actual benches on top of the wooden logs. So later on I actually built a lot of like the foliage, and there's a lot of like cut down trees, so I just imagine that all of the wood used in the mining complex is actually from right there, from like the local area. So there's a lot of just cut down trees and all of that to make it look like this entire area, like someone just discovered gold and just wrecked the entire area. So the original, well, location of the mine is, or was probably just a forest, like the rest of the Mirage Mountains, or at least a huge portion of the Mirage Mountains. Yeah, it's getting late again. I'm going to mess up words again, but I really like it. That doesn't, well, that might be misinterpreted. I don't like messing up words, it just becomes funnier over time. But yeah, the mess hall turned out great. I also put in some flags so that, you know, the miners aren't really constantly cold. And then I made a mistake because I'm now connecting the roof of the mess hall to the actual, well, mountain. And I originally said, oh, the Japanese macaques can't climb anything. But then I built the mess hall after I found it out, so I built it with climbable objects. Can you see where it went wrong? Yeah, the Japanese macaques in the end were actually able to climb the entire mountain. So I went a little bit too extreme with climbable area. But anyway, I did fix that by basically just adding a few rocks, because even though they're monkeys, it doesn't seem like they're the greatest of climbers. Like, they aren't as, well, escape experts as, let's say, the lemurs. But yeah, now back into the thing that we're actually building, which is basically just a fence, which game physics wise I don't really need, because first of all, the guests don't leave the pods, well, unless they see an exhibit, because then they leave everything. But the animals, or the macaques, as I said, aren't the greatest of climbers, so they can't get to the actual guest pod. So this fence is just there to look pretty, just for that reason. Also, you will see me mess around with it a little bit, because I wanted it to work in a certain way and it didn't, and then I just gave up and made it work in the way that I originally made it to. So yeah, sometimes I want to do something and I can't get to it, or I'm too impatient for it. Mostly too impatient, which kind of understandable since I call myself a squirrel. That I'm, well, so far I have told you guys that most of the time I either sound drunk or high, which I never am. I am very bad at organizing things, or at least I constantly put things off, and just, well, I mean, this college project was great evidence for that, and I'm just impatient as ever. So yeah, let's just move on, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck on the college project forever. But yeah, it was also a little bit of a trouble of like, how do the staff actually get here? because it's a mine. It's on one side enclosed by a mountain, on the other side it's the gas bed, and basically a ravine or canyon in between with a raging waterfall and just rapids. So basically one of the mine shafts that's in the quarry, because I did actually make mine shafts in there, I linked up to the back of the mountain, and now there's like a tiny little guest village there that connects to the gas path through another, well, mine shaft. So there's a secret little village there. But in the end, it just, well, all of the foliage. And you will see like a lot of like tree stumps and such. And I really actually like the area. Even though there's not a lot of foliage, well, which is kind of understandable. It's an area of work, so it's not like it's an abandoned mine. It's actually still worked at, so not a lot of foliage unless it's in like areas that the miners or the people working at the quarry don't really walk. So in those areas that the plants don't get stepped on, that's where I really go wild. Or at least put a little bit of foliage, because again, it's a mine. It's mostly rock, so plants don't really live there. However, I made entire floating rocks and then made them completely covered in foliage, so yeah. Sometimes, well, most of the times I go against what I say. Most of the times. But, however, this quarry is a little bit of an example of like not having that rough line in between sections of the park or a zoo, because I always hate that because nature doesn't do that. With this area, it's basically just like a transition from the Mirage Mountains, which is, you know, always like minus 15 degrees Celsius, to the more hill area, well, foothills of the Mirage Mountains, where it's like around 0 degrees Celsius. So, however, we will get into that later because the video is ending. So the next video will be on the other section of the mining complex, which is going to house some wolves. I'm not going to say which one because I myself have not figured that out yet. Either the Arctic ones or just the timber wolves. But that's going to be the next video. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, I hope to see you back in the next one, and I wish you all an amazing day. Bye bye.